We originally called the study of acupuncture in East Asian medicine traditional Chinese medicine because foundationally, a lot of the Chinese theory was put into books and then now brought over to the West, where we're trying to teach it in this like very linear and scientific way. But in reality, it was more than just the Chinese theory. There were many schools of thought in many East Asian countries that developed the study of medicine over millennia. And so we now term it East Asian medicine.
Welcome to Salad with a Side of Fries. I'm your host, Jen Trepic, talking wellness and weight loss for real life. We're here to clear up the myths, misinformation, bad science, and marketing to teach you how to eat and how to cheat. Are you ready? I'm having salad with a side of fries. Hey friend, welcome back to Salad with a Side of Fries. I'm Jen Trepic, your host and health coach, here with you every week for Wellness Without the Weirdness. And if you're in the United States, Thanksgiving is just a couple weeks away. And this show, Salad with a Side of Fries, we already started talking about the holiday season, maybe kind of early this year. Our first holiday-ish episode was back in October called How to Have Your Cake and Feel Great. We started ahead of Halloween. Today, though, we're talking more about how we experience the holidays and taking a look at it through an Eastern medicine lens with another guest expert. So let me introduce you. She's a multi-state licensed doctor of East Asian medicine and acupuncturist, holding licensure in Florida, New York, Virginia, Georgia, Maryland, Washington, D.C., Mexico, and New Jersey. She's a diplomat in East Asian medicine, certified by the National Certification Board for Acupuncture and Herbal Medicine. In 2021, she joined the Virginia University of Integrative Medicine, where she now directs external and clinical operations across Virginia, New Jersey, and Georgia campuses. In this capacity, she advances integrative clinic systems, community outreach, and academic clinical alignment. She's also a member of their teaching faculty. A former Division I athlete at UVA, her athletic background deeply informs her evidence-informed, performance-oriented clinical approach, supporting student athletes, optimizing sports-related performance and reentry, and addressing psycho-emotional wellness. Her early career included residencies at El Gancho Racket and Fitness Club in Santa Fe and working aboard Princess Cruise Lines, where she honed her ability to teach acupuncture in acute care and wellness contexts. Through her leadership, she fosters integration of East Asian medicine within whole-person healthcare models, builds bridges between academia, practitioners, and community, and advances the visibility and legitimacy of the profession. She remains passionately committed to teaching, patient care, student mentorship, and growing the profession through outreach, media, and scholarly communication, which is just one of the many reasons she is here with us today. So please give a warm salad with a side of fries welcome to Dr. Haley Parker.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. And we heard a little bit of your story in introducing you. We'll dig a little deeper into that and then go from there. Super quick, though, we have to tell our members what they're getting this week. So friends, be sure you're a member of the Happy Healthy Hub. Being a member of the Hub is the next best thing to working with me as your health coach. You get a recipe each week delivered to your inbox, curated articles, additional discounts from me and our partners. You get interview episodes like this one in full video, including some behind-the-scenes content, a community board with the ability to post and comment on other people's posts, plus access to the 24/7 Ask Me Anything to target your specific questions or challenges. You can upvote other people's questions, see past answers, and so much more. So all of this, by the way, is yours for just $12 a month, or prepay the whole year, you get 2 months free. So that's a year at $120. So your recipe this week is, by the way, perfect for entertaining. Or maybe you just want to change up your veggie dips. It's for spinach walnut pate. I will tell you, it looks super impressive. It's surprisingly easy to make. Plus, it's packed with nutrients. I mean, you could honestly make it not when you have guests over and just have it as a snack, but it's perfect for entertaining too. So to get this recipe, this episode in full video, access to the community chat, the 24/7 Ask Me Anything, go to asaladwithasideofFries.com/membership. From there, you click subscribe now, follow the prompts to enter your payment info, and create your login to access the hub and all of your benefits. Remember, you're going to asaladwithasideofFries.com/membership, or just click the link below in the episode notes. Remember, of course, this not only supports your health, it supports this show so that we can keep doing this together. All right, Dr. Haley. So We heard in introducing you that you were an athlete and you're an acupuncturist and a doctor of East Asian medicine. So, will you connect those dots for us? Like, how did you get from growing up an athlete to wanting, to study what some might consider maybe like not the typical path?
Totally. And I always tell people that the path really chose me because I did not ever think I was going to be an acupuncturist, let alone work on cruise ships, let alone, be in higher education. So ultimately, I just kept going through the open door. And being an athlete, I grew up with brothers and we were very energetic, and my mom looked for ways to get our energy off. So we were at pretty much in all sports. And I chose diving. So it's very acrobatic. And you do a lot of flipping and twisting and crashing. And just like any high performance sport, sometimes you're listening to your coaches more than you're listening to your body. And when your body is screaming at you that hurts, you're like, okay, just ice it, just like stretch it out, just get up there and do it again and keep going. And we really take for granted like the healthy body until it breaks. And then all we want to do is get well. And so after I retired from athletics after college, I was working a manual type job with my grandfather who was running an aviation business. And my injuries were just there again, the canaries, they were screaming at me. And I think he got so tired of hearing me complain that he took me to his acupuncturist. And this was by the grace of God, and like just it saved my life in the sense that I never knew how well I could feel because I had just been living with low level chronic pain since I was young and just thinking I was worn out and an athlete, and that's what everyone has is pain. And the more that I talked with this doctor, the more that it innately made sense to me. And I ended up studying with him over that time with my grandfather and then ultimately applied to school. And then when I applied to school, I was, intrigued by it. I wanted to help people. I wanted to really teach people that there was something that they could do for their health versus just wait for their injuries to get so bad where an intervention like surgery or a stronger medication would be the band-aid. And so here I was as an athlete and going to school. And I then was like, wow, is this it? Like now what? After you graduate from school. And it just so happened that I have a very free spirit. And as you do when you're an acupuncturist. And I decided to join cruise ships. And cruise ships were a win-win because I was fulfilling my degree of, practicing medicine. But I was also able to travel and kind of buy myself a little bit more time after school to like figure it out, right? And before I had to like grow up. And the beauty of that was I would have to give lectures on board and really help support all of the passengers and the crew members that were there for months at a time. And, you were under a lot of stressors and variables that you wouldn't necessarily think on like a vacation, where it's like you just had long travel, you'd have to get up early and go on these excursions. Say you'd have like a flare up of something, you'd get ill and you didn't want to miss your vacation. And so I was very much an intervention. And that was very transformative in the way I approach the medicine of being, not only educational to people that this is something that they could use, it could help prevent them from their injuries getting worse so they can make it through their vacation and get home to their primary care. But then also it helped to intervene at a time when somebody was like kind of desperate. And that ability to empower somebody and have them enjoy their vacation, share these experiences with their family ultimately inspired me to then go into teaching. And so I now help run a school here located in Northern Virginia. And every day I learn more from the students as we typically do, the way they ask questions. And it's like, I never thought about that before. But also working in the field of advocacy, of helping to promote the profession across the country. Each state has its own jurisdiction and licensing, but working together to unite the profession, help to integrate it into the whole person healthcare model, as well as continue to teach the future generation of acupuncturists that one day will inherit the baton.
Absolutely. And I know when we first spoke, like we had a whole conversation about whole person care and some of the work I'm doing in that space. So we'll continue that conversation. But for today, I think before we get too far into it, maybe let's just define for everybody Eastern medicine, right? And maybe even then too, differentiating between Eastern medicine and acupuncture, because acupuncture is one approach.
Totally.
Yeah.
That's a great question and a great distinction. So a lot of the time the words will be used interchangeably. And so it's a matter of like semantics and just understanding the context of what someone's speaking about. So as far as we originally called the study of acupuncture in East Asian medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, because foundationally, a lot of the Chinese theory was put into books and then now brought over to the West, where we're trying to teach it in this like very linear and scientific way. But In reality, it was more than just the Chinese theory. There were many schools of thought in many East Asian countries that developed the study of medicine over millennia. And so we now term it East Asian medicine. There are different traditions. There's Japanese medicine, there's Korean medicine. So there's many different schools of thought that have come together in this mesh that we're so lucky to have access to now. And even till still to this day, we continue to do translations of research from way back when, discover new burial grounds that have different books, and also with the use of modern technology, really understand what the ancient practitioners were discovering in their years and years of observations and practice of this medicine. So, traditional East Asian medicine is like the overarching umbrella that houses then very different modalities. And so acupuncture is one of those modalities within the medical system. So in East Asian medicine, you also have nutrition therapy, which I'm sure you know a lot about being in the healthcare space and also loving salads and fries. Then there's also herbal medicine. So using traditional Chinese herbs or East Asian herbs rather than pharmaceutical drugs to put together a prescription to help support the constitution and the person's ailments, as well as then manual therapies. So these would be like the yoga, the qigong, the tai chi, the exercise therapy, the chiropractic type therapies that have also now evolved over time to create their own disciplines. So with that, there's many different ways in which you can break up the East Asian subcategories. Ultimately, I think it's always so fascinating that the number one pillar of health in traditional East Asian medicine is actually rightful thinking. And this is where a lot of the Eastern traditions really focus on meditation and de-stressing, which in our modern society here in the Western countries, stress is almost like just a thing we check the box on because everyone has a level of stress, especially if you live on the East Coast like we do. So ultimately remembering that like how we are interacting with our environment is a big part of maintaining our health, but also preventing illness from setting in.
Yeah, we're going to definitely dig deeper into all of that because I love what you're talking about there. But there's also a piece that I think you mentioned too in telling your story and working on the cruise ships, that there's also this, I guess, two things that are coming to mind. One is that East Asian approaches are both for acute and chronic care.
Mhm.
So the immediate intervention, something, is going to get better versus something that we're dealing with all the time. And then the other piece is that, to your point of the number one pillar being our thinking, there are these tools of herbs and acupuncture and on, but also lifestyle is inherently part of this approach.
Absolutely. And this is something that if you really think of like our ancestors, right? And even no matter what culture you came from, it doesn't have to be East Asia, but they really lived with nature. It wasn't so juxtaposed of like in, modern times where we're staying up and we're looking at blue lights all the time or screen time and, we have to sit in traffic and we're like, our hip flexors tighten up and, our family has to be in 100 different sports clubs and, all of these other things that we do now as part of our lifestyle were not necessarily factors. And I always like to remind my patients, just to put it in context and remind myself, by the way, that, our brains and our evolution, they're still like archaically wired to 40,000 years ago, where we can't really differentiate between, like, say, a saber-toothed tiger attack, or saber-toothed tiger is around 40,000 years, like an attack
Yeah.
of like a
But that's
predatorial
the
animal.
quintessential example of stress.
It's the
So
quid
I'm
yeah.
with you
So,
100%.
an attack by a saber-tooth tiger versus, an email from your boss after a really long day where you're just like, "I just need to take a break," right? And how we then have to modulate those inputs and be able to get back into that therapeutic window, or we call it the window of tolerance. And, a lot of our lifestyle these days is very hyper aroused. And then as we do, our nervous system tries to bring us down so that we don't have like high blood pressure or heart attack or, some level of like explosion. And sometimes that goes into hypoarousal where it's like we almost get chronically fatigued or depressed or, just apathetic because it's like, when is this roller coaster ever going to change? And so having situations like acupuncture, East Asian medicine, philosophies, lifestyle type behaviors to help support that therapeutic window, our nervous systems can regulate a lot better. And it's in that homeostatic set point there in that window that our bodies know what to do. So everything that our body's wired to do is to keep us alive and to regulate. And sometimes we just need a little bit of support and a little bit of help. So often it's something as simple as what our grandmas or, would say to us in their wisdom of like, well, just get a good night's sleep and it'll look better in the morning. And it's amazing how a good night's sleep really changes the perception or really helps those headaches go away or really, helps the body to like get back on track. Sometimes it's not that easy, and you do need a more serious intervention. But like so many of those things, of fresh air, a glass of water, some, good night's sleep, some time and community fellowship with friends, and so many things start to shift.
1,000%. And so that, along with even things that you were mentioning before, like tie into the other half of this episode, which is the holiday woes, right? So as we think about those, like you mentioned travel, I also think about, the holiday season and the indigestion or the foods that come up that are certainly likely not our everyday choices. What else does that make you think of in terms of the holiday woes?
Oh, the holidays tend to be a struggle for a lot of people, and it can be sometimes because they don't have family or they don't have the
Yeah.
positive relationships, and it maybe reminds them of that. Also, we have to remember that the seasons change, and in the fall time, it is in traditional East Asian medicine, it's a time of grieving and letting go and refinement, and we associate these things with our correspondence of organ systems and colors and sounds, and it's very poetic if we really dive into the theory of traditional East Asian medicine. But the lung time or the grieving time is really a part of us taking in and exhaling out what we don't need. And so, with that, we tend to have a lot of these other thoughts coming up, whether it's, we're remembering the loss of our loved ones, we're seeing the bareness of the trees, the daylight hours are shrinking. And so even at that, our bodies are really going into a hibernation mode. And when we're trying to still be mammalian productive, like humans are one of
I
the
was
only
going to say
mammals that,
hibernation. Yeah. Right.
we
We're
we
human. Hmm.
humans don't hibernate ever, right? And so here, all of our mammalian counterparts are starting to slow down and we're revving up and we're like, no, we got to go to these parties. We got to go to Friendsgiving. We got to go to Thanksgiving. We got to go see the in laws. We got to go and it can be a lot of stress. And that already when our bodies are trying to take that downshift and we're throttling forward, that can put a little bit more stress on the nervous system to perform. Additionally, you brought up digestion. And we do tend to congregate around food and maybe eat foods that we're not listening to our natural signals. But also, when we're under a lot of stress, we go into that system of fight or flight rather than rest and digest. So our digestive functions tend to be dulled. And here we are, maybe stuffing ourselves or gorging ourselves, especially if you were in my household. We had to wait for our Thanksgiving meal, which was usually in the middle of the day, but we were starving. And then I grew up with brothers, like I said before. So it's like if you didn't eat fast, you weren't going to get seconds. And so here you are, like shoving it in. And all of that can be a bit of a shock to the system. So those are some talking points, but we can certainly go in further. There are many ways in which the body is speaking to us. It's not doesn't speak to us in English or Chinese or French or Spanish. It speaks to us in symptom. And it's really being able to be more tuned into ourselves than all of the other things, especially around the holiday time, the extra emotion and commotion that goes on.
Yeah. So I want to dig into some of the action steps that we can take to help us feel our best through the travel, the holiday meals, the mood, high or low, right? All of those pieces, and take that East Asian medicine approach. So we'll do that after we highlight our partner for this episode. Let's be honest, the wellness world has gotten a little out of hand. 10,000 rules, 5 million products, and frankly, just way too much guilt. That's why I wrote Uncomplicating Wellness. Ditch the rules, quiet the noise, reclaim your life. It's the book that says, hey, you don't need to do everything to be healthy. You simply need to do what you already know works for you. It's real talk and science, like salad with a side of fries, because feeling well doesn't require punishment or perfection. If you're ready to stop second guessing yourself, finally feel at peace in your own body, and taking actions that will move the needle toward your goals, grab your copy of Uncomplicating Wellness, available now wherever books are sold, or text the word book, BOOK, to 833-801-0500. There you can learn more with a clickable link. Again, text the word book, BOOK, to 833-801-0500. Let's move from exhaustion to clarity, from fear to discernment, and from chasing healthy to truly feeling well on your own terms. Okay, Dr. Haley, so let's start with some of those. We have indigestion, stress, certainly old habits that creep up, travel things, and thinking about it from both maybe some prevention ideas, but also that immediate intervention, when something shows up. So maybe let's start. I mean, we were sort of already going down this road. So let's start with the stress piece.
Gosh, so it's going to be different for each person. And especially like no matter how mindful we can be, no matter how many meditations we put on, like even if we got our run in the morning, like there will always be a level of triggers. And I tell you what, family can push those buttons better than anybody. So with that, I think mindfulness is a great approach of that you're going to be going into a situation where you just have to have a little bit of grace with yourself and with others. It can also be very stressful for your family members, your friends, your partners, your children, and they can be little barometers of your own stress. So recognizing that there's a lot of energy mixed up in this soup. As far as like leading with compassion and remembering it's a time of gratitude, that we maybe get really frustrated with each other, but still at the end of the day, we're grateful for the texture that people bring to our lives. Also, there are things and rituals that you can do for yourself. I find that self care is something we throw around a lot, but we're not necessarily recognizing what that is. And self care is going easy on yourself or taking what you need to be able to present a better version of yourself. So, getting a good night's sleep, being able to like pepper yourself through the day and maybe not start the cranberry and the champagne in the morning and maybe like being able to like push that through the day so that you can be a little bit more mindful and enjoying the moment, as well as, just being sure that in anything you can write it down and you can always talk it out later. I find that journaling is a great way for you to recognize your thoughts, acknowledge how you're feeling, and then put it to the side and revisit it at a more appropriate time when you're not around a bunch of family members that you only see one time a year.
Yeah, I love that. And then, you brought up sleep in that. So, what are some of the recommendations that might be most helpful to help us get that quality night's sleep? And then the next day, maybe, something we could do if we didn't get that sleep that we would ideally want.
Totally. So, as far as like sleep's hard, especially when like maybe you're anticipating something in the morning, you keep waking up throughout the night, checking the clock. Our circadian rhythms can certainly get thrown off if we're visiting another place or in a different time zone. But ideally, too, you're getting the right number of hours for you. We do have a standard of, say, like 7 to 8 hours, but ultimately, in traditional East Asian medicine, we're asking, do you feel rested when you wake up in the morning? Because some people can operate on very little sleep, or it's quality of sleep. Like, did you get into your deeper REM sleep? If you do find yourself waking up throughout the night, never underestimate the power of a power nap. Even if it's 30 minutes and you're just going into like sort of a trance state where you're not fully asleep, because that will really help to reset your nervous system and bring it back down into more of a recharge state. Things to do, like depending on your version of caffeine, there's always that like thing that you could throttle forward, pay for the effects later. And by the way, listeners, yes, I drink caffeine. Sometimes I have to qualify. I'm no saint. I also am a human being that has my stressors, but finding wholesome forms of caffeine, it would be really great along with balancing out your blood sugar so you don't hit that cortisol spike with, green tea or say like a wholesome meal in the morning so that you're not starving by the time it gets to the big family meal. That'll really keep your blood sugar levels level. It'll keep your tolerance levels going strong. And also it'll give you that sustainable energy because we forget that like our bodies still run on fuel and rather than gasoline you put in the tank, it's the wholesome meals that we eat.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of what we eat, let's talk about that digestive discomfort that can happen when either from the travel piece, right, and changes to our elimination from travel, and or, we're around foods that are not just the things that, we only eat at the holidays, but also a lot more often, like you mentioned before, the parties and all the events and things like that. What are some of your recommendations based on East Asian medicine?
So it always goes back to balance, right? And so remembering we're not Bunsen burners. Calories in don't necessarily equate to calories out or weight gain or whatever that is. But, if you're doing a lot of sitting, remember that there should be some movement involved. I tell my patients that we want to think of everything as like an algebraic equation. And if you're going to add more to this side of the equation, these variables on the X side of the equation, what are you going to do to keep the Y where you want it, right? And you guys get flashbacks from the terrors of algebra class. So ultimately, like, do you you add something in? Do you subtract something? And if you're adding something in, what do you have to do on the other side of the equation? With that, drinking water, it's a very easy way for your body to continue to like lubricate and to stay full. If, say, like you're in that stress state of wanting to crave more and more sugar, I know those treats are so delectable. I typically am saving up for the pumpkin pie at the end of the night. So I and a second, for a midnight snack. So it's one of those things of where you make sure you have that bigger vision of the long-term goal of how to manage your day. But yes, exercise, a walk around the block, that could still be a form of quality time with your family. Also, if you're doing any of the helping around, setting the table, keeping your hands busy, helping cooking, and that is not only great ways to bond through the experience, but you are still moving and bending and twisting. And so there are things like that you can stay in your awareness of that you're not just eating and then it's not a self-fulfilling prophecy of continuing to reach for the next snack or the next bite.
Yeah, and any herbs or things that you recommend, when people are really feeling, especially because I think as we get into the holidays where it's not just the first one or the second one, but then you're like, okay, I'm in the thick of it and I know it's not over yet, right? And we maybe need some of those interventional pieces.
There's always a need for an intervention at a certain point. There are definitely Chinese herbs that help with what's called food stagnation or where your system's just really backlogged. There are also herbal formulas that are going to help for the movement of the organs, the motility or that peristalsis it's called, to really help get the gunk out. In addition to herbal formulas that would maybe help with any sort of headaches, maybe the hangover, maybe you slept wrong on the guest bed, and it's just something that can help to calm the nervous system and also help with the target organs that are affected.
Yeah, and then you mentioned too the activity piece and the movement. And I know so many of us, and you were an athlete, right? So we get into our routines and we know what our plan is, and then we are out of our routines.
Mhm.
And so for some of us who are so disciplined around that, and then the changes to the routine can have us feeling very much out of sorts.
Oh, yeah. So that would be closest related to circadian rhythms, where your body, some people wake up at 5 o'clock no matter what, and then they have their regimen of they drink their coffee, they go to the gym, they walk their dog, they have their morning rituals in the bathroom, they then, they have their regimen. And if they don't do that regimen, their body doesn't know what's going on. If we think of our body almost as a third party, we have to take care of our body. And so there's still ways in which we can implement some routine. It's a little harder when you're guests in other people's homes or say like you're visiting and you don't have the same equipment available to you. But with that, if you can remember to go to bed and have sleep hygiene, go to bed and wake up about similar times, in addition to like remembering like to modify your activities so that you still can fit a little bit in at the normal times, your body will still stay on its track, even if it is a different exercise or a little bit of a different routine.
Yeah, and then I want to go back to what you talked about with the human is a mammal. We are the mammal that doesn't hibernate. And then even in the beginning of the episode, you talked about tuning into how our body is communicating with us. And so this time of year with that seasonal transition, there's, it makes me think of, seasonal affective disorder and some of these other things that come up. What are some of your recommendations for preparing for that and honoring that mammalian piece of the human body?
I have a really great friend who is a naturopath and nutritionist, and she uses the phrase of different organs go on vacation different times of year. And so, with that, nutrition is so important. And this is where eating seasonally is very important for the health benefits that come from these different foods that we're extracting these nutrients from. But oftentimes, those nutrients are what's needed to help support our organ system when they're on vacation, as well as keeping our system moving. And so, in traditional East Asian medicine, we have what's called the Harari clock, or it's like the organ clock, where different areas of the body get like highlighted energy surges at different times of the day over a 24-hour period. Equally, over the seasonal clock, that's the same thing. And so, if you really think during the fall time, we have this harvest. We have the pumpkins, we have the root vegetables, we have the nuts, which are really high in nutrients and fat content, but the good kind of fats. We have like the cranberries with the vitamin C for colds and flus. And those kind of aspects of the foods are really needed for our body. That's why it tastes so good. Like when you eat a food that's in season, not only is it fresh and it's in season, but it tastes so good because your body is actually craving it to some degree. And with that, You can still support it with supplementation. I have another friend who's a great doctor and says you really can't out supplement a poor diet, but if you're mindful of what's being produced seasonally, you're able to think about balancing a meal with some green vegetables and different colors on your plate, then for the most part you're doing it right.
Yeah, I hope everybody is hearing like so much of what you're saying is stuff that we talk about all the time. And I appreciate that because it reinforces and then helps everybody hear it, different ways, different
Yeah.
times, all of
Oh,
it.
tell me about it. Like,
Yeah.
the number of times I'll tell my patients and then I'll send them to a colleague as, like, a referral, and the colleague will say exactly what I said, and the patient will come back and say, "Oh my gosh, she's so brilliant. Do you know what she just said to me?" And, like, there's always that part of me that's like, I kinda roll my eyes and I bite my tongue, and I'm just like, "Oh my gosh, she's so smart. I'm so glad you said that." And, like, but it
Right.
the echo is really important and the reinforcement. And I'm sure for a lot of you listeners out there, you could think about your husband and wife where it happens the same thing. Like you'll hear it from a friend and you're like, you roll your eyes. You're like, haven't I been telling you this for like days? So, but
Exactly.
it's the way our ears have selective hearing a little bit.
Absolutely. And I also think it's worth reminding everybody to, you said this to me last time we spoke, rest is an active state.
My brother had to teach me that one. Yeah, and I thought it was so profound. Like, in this lifetime, we're all learning to be better doctors of ourselves, and I think that's something that was very humbling of going into this medicine is that I was really looking for tools to take better care of my machine, and then ultimately, I wanted to help others like I was helped. Well, so often we're given these health challenges in our life, and we have to be advocates for ourselves and learn these tools. And then as we learn these tools, it's amazing the number of people we start to encounter where we can give them our subjective experience. We can give them our little bits of like, hey, but have you looked into this? Have you asked your doctor about this? Have you tried this? And ultimately, we're helping others find their way through the darkness of like whatever journey they're on. And my brother was recognizing how, like, through at med school, I was just like, I was so run down. I was trying to still force myself in that like competitive athlete mindset of like, no, get up, push harder, you'll get through it faster. And my body would go through those cycles of just like breaking down, getting sick, and like it was lingering and it wasn't going away. And he intervened and he was like, Haley, like it's yin and yang balance for a reason. He was spitting it back to me, right? And he's like, rest is very important and you have to really focus on rest. And we think we're not being quote unquote productive, but in all actuality, our body needs that time. Like you can only go so many days and not rest, and you start to have serious health complications. And we take it for granted because we think like these phrases of, oh, we'll sleep when we're dead. And we can get away with like, pumping our adrenals with more and more caffeine, which we do from time to time, right? It's about the balance then of are we remineralizing? Are we hydrating? Are we catching up on sleep? Or our body's going to be really, really clever and get us sick to where we crash out and we spend like a weekend just in bed, right? Because one way or another, we'll find that equilibrium. So ultimately, I heard it loud and clear. And I was recognizing, like, wow, my body is speaking to me. And what are the repercussions if I didn't start resting? Now, that being said, also, as we start to recognize these signs and symptoms of our body, we start to hear them so much more and we become hyper vigilant of how our body is adapting. And we as women, we tend to notice our face, our fine lines and wrinkles, and like that is the scariest thing that's going to motivate us to get some rest. But ultimately, like, it's so true in whatever element we're talking about. And the more we start to recognize those signals, the body doesn't have to scream them to us. They can just give us the subtle hint and we'll start to listen and we'll respect it. Because anything our body does, it's trying to keep us well and keep us going and get us through the survival of whatever crazy jungle we live in.
Yeah. And I want to highlight how you tied that into like cold and flu season and being around kids' germs and all of those other pieces that we think are so tied to the season, but our susceptibility to them is potentially more tied to that active rest, that taking care of ourselves.
It is. And there are so many variables at play. Sometimes there are super bugs and it's just inevitable. Like, you get
For
sneezed, right?
sure.
There are definitely those things. In medicine, there's two theories. There's the germ theory of like, the germ penetrates. There's also the terrain theory. And the terrain theory is that if your constitution is strong enough and your immune system strong enough, then even if a germ infiltrates you, your body will fight it off. What does that need? Well, it needs resources. It needs intervention quicker, sooner than later. It needs, proper nutrients so that your immune system is supported. Or if you are contracting a bug, Chinese medicine's great for certain herbal formulas that help with this invasion. We call it a wind invasion in traditional East Asian medicine. And there's a lot of cathartic herbs that help to break a sweat, raise your core body temperature and really kick out these bugs before it sets into like the cold and flu of like the headache, the sinuses, as it's penetrating deeper and deeper into the organ levels. As I mentioned before, though, just remember the body's really clever and it's very opportunistic. So if you have been really run down and not taking care of yourself and your body encounters a bug, or say, like, you finish finals time if you're at school or something like that, tendency is your body's like, oh, thank goodness, now I can get sick because I now have the opportunity to rest. And so there's sometimes where the body works a lot better under love than hate, and recognizing that some of those things the body really needs. If you can nurture your body, you can take care of your body. As inconvenient as it may be to get ill, your body's really trying to help recover through that hard time. And it wasn't getting sick when it really needed to perform, like during your finals or your presentation, your dissertation, whatever the thing was that it was not allowing itself to fall short on.
Yeah, and the other thing that you brought up was this idea of being a better practitioner of ourselves. And the more we tune into that, the more we tune into our own body signals, how powerful that is. And that we then start to pay attention to the whisper before it gets to the scream.
It does. So this is something that I found also very fascinating about the Eastern tradition is we're not just physical bodies, we're mental, emotional, spiritual bodies in a physical form. And so when we talk about traditional East Asian theories, a lot of them are very circular. There's a lot of wisdom, and we can call it a spiritual tradition behind it, which many of the mystical traditions and religious traditions also still echo these same principles. And with that, sometimes you're feeling the ache in your heart, and it's this emotional or spiritual attack before it turns into palpitations, waking at night, or like a physical issue with your cardiovascular system. Or say a lot of people will show up and they manifest their stress up here on the shoulders, like the weight of the world, or they're feeling unsupported and they start to have this like chronic low back pain where they're just crippling under pressure. And so remembering that your body is speaking in many different planes, and that we don't often get trained in our culture to acknowledge our emotions. We don't necessarily listen to our thoughts or that autonomic soundtrack in our brain repeating things that we've learned from somebody. Sometimes I'll ask myself, like, I'll hear myself speaking and I'll be like, where did you learn that from? Right. And if you are able to recognize it, you could maybe change the narrative, or you can talk to one of your friends. Again, reach out to your people in your community and say, like, I need to talk this out, because when you hear yourself talk about it, you're like, wait a sec, why am I taking on that story? Maybe it's because you saw your parents living that story. Maybe because every Thanksgiving you have this eruption of a fight. And you're like, wait a second, am I just a habitual creature? And the answer is yes. Human beings are actually quite habitual. Our nervous system is actually trained. And so, if we can consciously intervene in that, we have a tendency to be able to rewrite the story. This is where I'll plug journaling again, because when I learned how to do that tool, I also think about the perfectionist in me that didn't journal for the longest time because I didn't want to mess up the journal page. And then I'm like, wait, this is my scrap like journal, and how much it was beneficial for me to just like release some of the stress and tension. But the even more interesting part was when I'd reread it, I acknowledged what I was feeling, so I didn't have that same, like, overtaking of the emotion inside of me, and it intervened in a lot of other stress responses that I would get, whether it was migraine headaches, whether it was just that upset stomach, whether it was that anxiety that like, prevented me from getting a deep breath, and I was able to start to interface with my environment a lot more grounded, and I was able to work with people. And so these are the types of tools I'm talking about when I say be a better doctor of yourself. Like recognizing that everything your body's saying to you is really a sincere act of love to try to help you understand where you are in that, and ultimately how to then tailor it. Because there have been certainly situations I've had to modify in my life. Like I can't pull all-nighters anymore, Like even way back when I really wasn't doing it successfully, but recognizing that if I do that, the repercussions are far too great, and that that's just not something I want to take on, understanding then all of the other things that would follow. So aspects like that of knowing thyself and then taking the necessary steps to alter the story for your greater good. Because ultimately, when we talk about health care, we're not talking about sick care. It's not just absence of symptoms. It's actually what is your quality of life you're looking for and how do you get to do the things you want to do? Like, yes, I want to go out with my friends. I want to be able to enjoy Thanksgiving with my family. I want to still get up the next day and go Black Friday shopping. And so it's like, well, if I want to do all these things, how do I modify myself in that story so that I can continue to live the life that I want to live?
1,000%. And I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you this question while you're here, because you serve on the Professional Ethics and Disciplinary Committee for the National Certification Board of Acupuncture and Herbal Medicine. With that sort of foundation, how can people find a practitioner near them and know that they're worth their salt?
Sure. That's a great question. So there are state boards, advocacy boards that you can go to their websites and you can see practitioners that are listed on those websites. You can also go to the national website. It's going through a name change, but currently it's the NCCAOM, the national certification for the acupuncture. And there are a list of licensed acupuncturists there in that area. Also, just like anything, I really encourage people to find a practitioner they resonate with. There are many great practitioners, but it does not mean that's necessarily the right practitioner for you. So, just like a hairdresser, I've gotten my hair done by many people, but it's like sometimes it lays better with a certain person. They're an artist and their art just speaks to me, right? Or like you can go to many places and eat a steak, but like this place does it the right way and you crave that flavoring and the way that they cook it. So there again, it doesn't mean it's bad. It just means you got to find a few. And often word of mouth, as you start to ask your friends, like, do they get acupuncture? Who's the person that they go and see? You might be surprised that many of your friends are already doing this. They just never thought to bring it up in conversation, and they might start saying the same names. With that, I always also think to remember convenience, because when you're really trying to juggle one more thing in your schedule, you don't want to be stressed out going to one more appointment. In fact, you want it to be a part of your life. As Jen mentioned, it's a lifestyle medicine. So you want to include it and incorporate it into your life. And if you're driving, 2 hours against bridge traffic, to get to your appointment, well, by the time you get all relaxed and zen in the treatment, and then you're like hitting traffic on the way back, like you kind of outdo back to those math equations, right? You're kind of subtracting the benefits already. So factoring in something that's convenient for you within your price point. Fortunately, many practitioners take insurance these days, or there's a school nearby that could offer a discounted treatment that helps promote the future profession. So there are many ways in which to find a practitioner, and a Google search is always a great place to start as well.
Awesome. With that, a final thought, anything to wrap this up?
Well, so I just recognize probably everyone has stress around the holidays. If not, everyone's probably having stress all the time. I sometimes call myself out that when I'm really feeling buckled down, like sometimes I have to remember wow, I'm a pretty resilient person and I've learned to recognize that. But if I'm struggling, maybe someone else around me is struggling, and to have a little bit of compassion or to open my eyes and look of how I could maybe support someone else. And that oftentimes is a beautiful, synergistic way of helping me get out of my funk. In addition to that, some people are just better at hiding it than we are. And if you go up and you talk to them, maybe there's a way in which both of you could find a way through the stress of the holidays. It also could lead to wonderful healing if there's a conversation that comes up from a place, a heart-centered space of, the family dynamics, and just lead with love.
Awesome. Beautiful. All right, it's time for a rapid fire off-topic questions. You ready?
Sure.
All right. What's the best thing you've done for your health this week? What's the naughtiest thing you've done related to your health this week? Of course, not that anything's really naughty, but the salad and fries of your week, if you will.
Oh, sure. Well, so it's only Monday, Jen.
I know.
So you're catching me on a good week. So my boyfriend and I are training for a marathon, and I do not like running. I do not.
Me either.
I'm doing this for love. And there's a very fine love between love and hate. And so anyway, I have been doing a really good job of sticking to the training. And so we're currently on the 8 to 13 mile, long run pace. So I did my run and I stuck to my pace versus trying to push myself or beat myself up if I was not quite on the tempo. And then I hydrated afterwards. So I ate well and I hydrated afterwards. I'm very much accountable right now. The worst thing I did, I have a tendency to ruminate a lot. And so I can have my negative automatic thoughts on a runaway train. And while I can recognize them, I sometimes don't do a good job of acknowledging them and compartmentalizing them. I mean, we can get into female anatomy of how our brains are so like interconnected as females and the way our hormones surge into these like intricacies that it's a little harder for women to compartmentalize than our male counterparts. But I've definitely been ruminating over some things and it wears you out. And if we really think of our health and how just if we let our brain capacity wear out all of our energy and battery life, we have so much less energy to be present in the moment, focusing on our patients, our colleagues, our coworkers. And so just recognizing that and trying to get a better handle on that by the end of the week.
1,000%. All right. If you weren't a doctor of East Asian medicine and acupuncturist, what would you do?
I would probably be like a criminologist or something like that. Like, I love the psychology of reading patterns, which is very much a traditional East Asian practice. But I always grew up with those watching those shows like The Mentalist or like CSI and like how there were so many like clues along the way. I'm squeamish and I probably don't have the heart for looking at dead bodies, but but
Minor detail in our
yeah,
imaginary world. Yeah.
minor detail, but I think that human psychology is so fascinating. And I do study with some people who, we tend to think that we're so advanced and higher level. And in all actuality, we're all part of this algorithm and we really, our choices can be mapped. Think of our phones and the ads that pop up. It's like, it's probably listening to this podcast right now and it's going to start popping up like places to get a salad this afternoon or, whatever it is. And like recognizing how much we really interface with our environment and where we can like pull ourselves into a much higher frequency and working with people in community rather than like getting pulled into the matrix. So pattern recognition, perhaps criminology, but also the fascinating aspects of how the brain works and how people do what they do.
Yeah, for sure. Everybody's about to start getting ads for every acupuncture clinic and like,
Good.
yeah.
Good. Everyone should try it. I tell people, I'm like, what's the worst that can happen? You get better. Like, there's no harm in this. There are no side effects except the ones you want, where your pain goes away or your digestion or your indigestion. So ultimately, it's worth a try. And then if you don't like it, like I said, try a few people and see if it's for you.
Yeah. All right. Favorite book on any topic other than your area of expertise, or you could give us a fiction book.
Well, okay. My favorite book ever is The Rift by Nathan Parker. My brother wrote a book and I happen to be a character in the book. So that
Well,
is
now
my
I'm going to
favorite.
have to get it.
Yeah, The Rift. I think it's on Amazon. As far as I always answer though with the one that's at the time that I'm reading as a secondary is I'm reading a lot on the Enneagram, which
Hmm.
is it's a psychological, map of
Yeah.
and it's again going back to patterns and it's so interesting of the different numbers that people are and how it gives you so much more compassion when you can understand somebody and how that applies into our lives. And as probably many of you listeners can tell, like even on a journey of being a person that helps others and lives a life of service, I still daily have to practice compassion. And so, ultimately learn having more tools to help me understand why someone maybe responds the way they do or is in relationship the way they are. It gives me more of a bandwidth.
For sure. All right. If you could cure one ailment, disease, or sickness, what would it be?
The first thing that popped into my mind was this fear. And that's
Hmm.
not fear has its place, but I was thinking more in the context of like imposter syndrome and that feeling of people having a bigger fear of success. So they limit themselves in like their full potential. And that sounds so weird.
No, that's a good one.
But I like the idea of helping people to like manifest and create the life that they want and not be held back by what if they fail.
If you were a superhero, what would be your superpower?
I would love to fly.
What's your biggest pet peeve?
Inconsiderateness, like just not being self-aware or like aware of your surroundings. For instance, if you're walking through a door, it's not hard to hold it for the next person. Or, if you cough, cover your mouth, considering that there are other people sharing a space. We live in a very congested area, both you and I, in the cities along the East Coast, and we all live our own tempo of life, but we're cohabitating, and there can be a lot of craziness when everyone's living at such a fast pace and difference of values and whatnot. But just having a little bit of respect and considerateness makes everything run a lot smoother.
Absolutely. All right. Last one. In your opinion, what's the next frontier in wellness?
Next frontier in wellness. So I work in advocacy of trying to integrate healthcare. And believe it or not, most everyone is in healthcare is oriented in that direction. There's a lot of nuance in that movement as far as lobbying and advocacy work for funding and research. But ultimately, I'd say in my timeline of being a practitioner, there will be much more integration, whether it's within hospital systems, major medical facilities. And I am excited to see that because ultimately the patient gets the benefit. And with that, I'd say education is a big part of helping patients choose their provider and be at the center of the care model.
100%. Well, Dr. Haley Parker, thank you for being here. Tell everybody how to connect with you, where to learn more about everything you're doing, all the advocacy as well.
Great. Well, check out our website. It's vuimclinic.com. You can also check out our socials and follow us if you have those platforms. I am located in Tysons Corner, Virginia. So if you are nearby, please come and see us. We have our professional clinic and we do take insurance. We're also in network with the VA. We have a student clinic, which is a significantly reduced rate clinic for helping our students get their treatment numbers. They are overseen by a licensed professional, but they are always so eager and engaged with their patients. It's a really fun experience. And there are a lot of people that are converted into our world by just coming and experiencing a treatment.
Love it so much. Thank you again for being here. Just truly appreciate your time, your energy, and your passion for this. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, friends. On Friday, in this week's bite-sized bonus episode, we're talking about Oath Nutrition Clear Protein. So, as is my life, I was out of town on a girls' weekend, and these things come up, right? So one of my friends, shout out to Stephanie, she said she found a protein powder that she loves. I was like, send it to me. I want to look at it. So she sent me the link, and now we're going to look at it together on Friday in this week's bite-sized bonus episode. So be sure wherever you're listening, click the plus sign or the follow button, and then your app will alert you when it goes live on Friday morning. Well, as always, everybody, I'm your host, Jen Trepick. Connect with me on Instagram or all social media. I'm at Jen Trepick, JENNTREPECK. Website is asaladwithasideofries.com. Pick your platform, send a message. Hearing from you is the highlight of my day, whether it's your questions, your takeaways, or ideas for an episode. And then, of course, it's the easiest way to learn more about working with me as your health coach. Dr. Haley Parker, thank you again for joining us this week.
Thanks so much for having me. It was such a pleasure and so nice to learn from you too.
Likewise, I appreciate it. And friends, if you are not already a member, join us in the Happy Healthy Hub. You'll go to asaladwithasideofries.com/membership. This shows your support for this podcast, this community, and above all, your health. On top of this week's episode in full video with behind the scenes content, your 24/7 Ask Me Anything, the message board, all the things. Your recipe this week is for spinach walnut pate. So until next week, remember, sure, this season can be filled with woes. And we look to Eastern medicine for tools to address, minimize, and potentially even prevent them this holiday season. Well, friends, that's it for today's episode of Salad with a Side of Fries. Congratulations for making yourself and your health a priority. Thanks so much for joining us. Be sure to click subscribe or follow on your favorite podcast platform. Share us with a friend, and we'll be back next week. Always remember, you deserve it, and you are worth it. Happy healthy.